I never thought a corsage could break a heart until I watched my stepdaughter Melissa pin one on her wrist while deliberately avoiding eye contact with me. The delicate white orchid matched her ivory gown perfectly, just like everything else I'd spent months planning for her senior prom. But as she adjusted the flowers, her attention was focused entirely on the man standing beside her. Her biological father, Derek, who'd shown up 20 minutes ago with his usual swagger and immediately claimed credit for his beautiful daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been the one driving her to dress fittings, the one who'd spent 3 weekends calling venues when her original prom location fell through, the one who'd quietly handled the $200 hair and makeup appointment she booked without asking. Derek had contributed exactly nothing to this moment, unless you counted the chaos he brought into our lives 6 months ago when he'd suddenly decided to be a father again after 8 years of absence. "David, could you grab my phone?" My wife, Amanda, called from the kitchen, where she was arranging the pre-prom snacks I picked up that morning. "I want to get some pictures before they leave." I retrieved her phone from the charging station, trying to ignore the way Derek was adjusting Melissa's necklace, the one I'd given her for her 18th birthday last month. He was positioning himself like he'd been part of her life all along, his hand protectively on her shoulder as he whispered something that made her laugh. The same laugh I'd been hearing across the dinner table for the past 4 years, back when she actually acknowledged my presence. "You know, Princess," Derek was saying, his voice carrying that familiar note of manufactured charm, "your old man cleans up pretty good for a special occasion like this." He straightened his tie, a designer piece that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Everything about Derek screamed money and success, from his perfectly tailored suit to the Rolex that caught the light as he gestured. What it didn't scream was reliability, responsibility, or any of the qualities that actually mattered when raising a teenager. Melissa beamed at him, her eyes bright with a kind of hero worship I remembered from when she was 14 and first came to live with us. Back then, that adoration had been directed at me. I'd been the one helping her with algebra homework, driving her to dance classes, teaching her how to parallel park in the high school parking lot on Saturday mornings. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the cool stepdad and become just David, furniture in her life, useful but unremarkable. "Derek, you look wonderful," Amanda said, though I caught the slight tightness around her eyes that meant she was working hard to keep things civil. "Both of you do?" "Melissa, that dress is absolutely stunning." The dress had been another 3-week saga. Melissa had fallen in love with a gown at the boutique downtown. But when Amanda had quietly mentioned the price to me later that evening, I'd seen her wince. $400 was a stretch for us, especially with college looming in the fall. I'd worked 2 overtime shifts that month to cover it, telling Amanda I picked up the extra hours to help with general expenses. Melissa never knew about those long nights at the medical center, never knew I covered the cost of her dream dress while pretending Amanda's budget could handle it. "Thanks, Mom," Melissa said, smoothing the silk fabric. Derek helped me pick out the shoes. She lifted her foot slightly, showing off silver heels that probably cost another $150. He said a girl only gets one senior prom, so it should be perfect. I felt my jaw tighten involuntarily. Derek had helped her pick out shoes during one of their Saturday afternoon shopping trips, excursions that had become regular occurrences since his return. What he hadn't done was ask who was paying for them, because Derek never worried about mundane details like money. He'd never had to. His family had money, his business had money, and he moved through the world with the confidence of someone who'd never had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. The doorbell rang, interrupting my increasingly dark thoughts. Melissa's date had arrived. A nice kid named Jason whose family I'd gotten to know through the school district. His father was a teacher at the elementary school where I served on the board, and we'd struck up a friendship over our shared commitment to education funding. Jason was exactly the kind of young man I'd hoped Melissa would choose. Respectful, ambitious, planning to study engineering in the fall. "I'll get it," I said, grateful for the excuse to step away from Derek's performance. Jason stood on our front porch looking nervous and handsome in his rental tux, a clear plastic box containing Melissa's corsage clutched in his hands. Behind him, his parents waited in their car, following the tradition we'd established of carpooling to reduce the number of teenage drivers on prom night. "Hi, Mr. Chen," Jason said, his voice only slightly shaky with nerves. "Is Melissa ready?" "She is," I assured him, stepping aside to let him enter. "You both look great. Your parents staying for pictures?" "Yes, sir. Mom brought her camera." Jason's relief at having something to talk about was palpable. Despite having dated Melissa for 6 months, he still treated me with the careful respect of a young man who understood that stepdads could be protective. We returned to the living room just as Derek was explaining to Amanda how he'd coordinated the whole evening for Melissa. "I made sure Jason's family knew about the dinner reservation at Chez Laurent," he was saying. "Can't have my princess eating at some chain restaurant on her prom night." I felt the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. Chez Laurent was the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where appetizers started at $30. I'd made a reservation at Giuseppe's, a family-owned Italian place that was nice without being financially devastating for Jason's family. But apparently, Derek had taken it upon himself to upgrade the plans without consulting anyone about who was actually paying for this upgrade. Jason's expression had gone carefully neutral, the look of a teenager trying to hide panic. I caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod. Later, I'd quietly handle whatever financial crisis Derek had just created. It wouldn't be the first time I had to clean up the aftermath of Derek's grand gestures. "Derek," Amanda said carefully, "I think David might have already made arrangements." "Oh, I took care of it," Derek waved dismissively. "Called the restaurant myself, spoke to the manager. The Martinez party will be dining at 8:30 instead of 8. He turned to Jason with a kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I assume that's not a problem. I know Melissa's used to a certain standard." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Derek wasn't just talking about dinner reservations. He was drawing lines, establishing hierarchies. He was the biological father, the one with money and connections. Jason was just a high school kid, and I was just the stepdad who'd been keeping the seat warm until the real parent returned. "Actually," I said, my voice carefully level, "I should probably call Giuseppe's and cancel our reservation. Don't want them holding a table unnecessarily." Derek's smile widened, satisfied. "Good thinking. Always important to be considerate of working people." The condescension in his tone was masterful, just subtle enough that calling it out would seem petty, but clear enough that everyone in the room understood the message. Derek was the kind of man who ate at restaurants where you needed reservations weeks in advance. The rest of us made do with places that appreciated 24 hours notice. Amanda's camera appeared and we began the ritual of prom photos. Derek immediately positioned himself next to Melissa, his arm around her shoulders in a pose that spoke of ownership rather than affection. When Amanda suggested including me in some of the shots, Derek graciously stepped aside with an expression that managed to convey both generosity and mild confusion about why the stepdad needed to be in the family photos. "Get one of just Melissa and Derek," Amanda said, and I could hear the forced cheerfulness in her voice. "Father and daughter." As I watched Derek pose with Melissa, his hand on her shoulder, his expression proud and proprietary, I thought about the college applications I'd helped her complete, the essays I'd proofread, the deadlines I'd helped her track, the application fees I'd paid when Amanda wasn't looking. Derek had been completely absent for that process, but somehow he'd still managed to insert himself into her future. "You know what?" Derek said suddenly, as if struck by inspiration. "I should be the one to walk Melissa out to the car. Father's privilege, right, princess?" Melissa's face lit up like he'd just offered her the moon. "Really? That would be amazing." I felt something cold settle in my chest. For 4 years, I'd been the one handling the important moments. I'd walked her into her first day at our high school, stood beside her at the academic awards ceremony when she made honor roll, been there for every milestone that Derek had missed. And now, on one of the biggest nights of her senior year, she was erasing me from the picture entirely. "That's a wonderful idea," Amanda said, though I could see the apology in her eyes when she looked at me. Derek straightened his jacket and offered Melissa his arm with a flourish that belonged in a movie rather than our suburban living room. "Shall we, princess? Your chariot awaits." As they headed toward the door, Derek paused and turned back to me with an expression of casual superiority. "David, thanks for handling all the logistics tonight. I know Melissa appreciates having someone reliable to take care of the details while the real family enjoys the moment." The real family. The words hit like a physical blow, delivered with such casual cruelty that for a moment I couldn't breathe. 4 years of school events, 4 years of homework help, 4 years of being the steady presence in Melissa's life, and I was just logistics. Derek had been absent for her entire high school experience, but somehow he was real family, while I was just the help. I watched through the front window as Derek escorted Melissa to Jason's car, taking his time, making sure the neighbors could see him in his role as the proud father. He shook Jason's hand with a kind of firm grip that was meant to intimidate, said something that made Jason nod seriously, and then kissed Melissa's cheek before helping her into the backseat. As the car pulled away, Derek remained on the sidewalk, waving like he was sending off royalty. Then he walked back toward the house, his expression already shifting from paternal pride to something more calculating. Well, he said, stepping back into the living room where Amanda and I were cleaning up the remnants of the photo session. That went perfectly. Melissa looked absolutely radiant, didn't she? She did. Amanda agreed, though her voice was carefully neutral. Derek settled into my usual chair, the leather recliner I'd bought when we first moved into this house. He made himself comfortable with a kind of ease that suggested he belonged here, had always belonged here. You know, he continued, I've been thinking about Melissa's future. College, career plans, all of that. It's time for her real family to take a more active role in shaping her path. I felt Amanda tense beside me. We'd been dreading this conversation for months, ever since Derek had started his campaign to rebuild his relationship with Melissa. It wasn't enough for him to be part of her life. He needed to be the most important one. Derek, Amanda said carefully, Melissa's already submitted her college applications. She's been accepted to several schools. Yes, I know, Derek waved dismissively. But I think we can do better than state schools and community colleges. I've been looking into some options that might be more appropriate for someone with her potential. The condescension was breathtaking. Melissa had worked incredibly hard to get accepted to the state university and had earned academic scholarships that would cover most of her tuition. But Derek saw state schools as beneath his daughter, beneath the image he wanted to project. She's actually been accepted to some excellent programs, I said, unable to keep quiet any longer. The scholarships she received. Scholarships, Derek interrupted with a laugh that had no warmth in it. David, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but Melissa doesn't need scholarships. Her father can afford to give her the education she deserves. Her father. Not her stepfather. Not the man who'd been paying for her expenses for 4 years. Her father, the one who'd shown up 6 months ago with expensive gifts and grand promises, determined to reclaim his position as the most important man in his daughter's life. The thing is, Derek continued, leaning forward in my chair like he was sharing a confidence, I've been in contact with some admissions people at better schools. Private institutions that really know how to develop young talent. Princeton, Yale, schools like that. I felt my stomach drop. Melissa had never expressed interest in Ivy League schools, had never even taken the SATs at the level those institutions required. But more than that, the application deadlines for those schools had passed months ago. Derek, Amanda said, her voice taking on that warning tone I recognized. Those applications had to be submitted back in January. It's May now. Derek's smile was pure confidence, the expression of a man who'd never encountered a problem that money couldn't solve. Amanda, sweetheart, you're thinking like regular people. When you have the right connections, the right influence, deadlines become more flexible. I stared at him, beginning to understand the scope of what he was suggesting. Derek wasn't just talking about college applications. He was talking about buying Melissa's way into an elite institution through connections and influence, the kind of corruption that had been making headlines for years. Wealthy parents using their money to circumvent the system everyone else had to follow. You can't be serious, I said. Derek's expression hardened slightly, the mask of casual charm slipping just enough to show the man underneath. David, I understand this is difficult for you. You've done your best to provide for Melissa, and I'm grateful for that. But now her real father is back, and it's time for her to have the opportunities she deserves. The real father is back. The phrase echoed in my head, carrying all the dismissal and contempt Derek could pack into 4 words. I'd been keeping the seat warm, handling the daily responsibilities of parenting while Derek was off living his life without consequences. Now that Melissa was old enough to be interesting, old enough to reflect well on him, he was ready to claim credit for everything I built. The opportunities she deserves, I repeated slowly. You mean the opportunities you can buy for her? Derek's smile returned, colder this time. I mean the opportunities that come with having a father who's successful enough to provide them. Not everyone can give their children that kind of advantage, David. There's no shame in acknowledging your limitations. My limitations. The man who'd been absent for 8 years, who contributed nothing to Melissa's development or education, was lecturing me about my limitations. The man who'd never helped with homework, never attended a parent-teacher conference, never worried about how to pay for school supplies, was dismissing everything I'd done as insufficient. I thought about the envelope in my home office, the one I'd been carrying around for 3 weeks. The one that contained information Derek had no idea I possessed. Information that would change everything about his grand plans for Melissa's future. You know what, Derek? I said, standing up from the couch. You're absolutely right. There are opportunities that come with having the right kind of father. Derek's smile widened, mistaking my agreement for capitulation. I'm glad you understand. This isn't personal, David. It's just what's best for Melissa. I'll be right back, I said, heading toward my office. There's something I think you should see. In my office, I opened the locked drawer where I kept important documents. The envelope was right where I'd left it, thick with official papers and documentation. I'd been hoping I wouldn't have to use it, hoping that Derek would eventually show some genuine interest in being a father, rather than just playing one. But his performance tonight, his casual dismissal of everything I'd done for Melissa, had made the decision for me. When I returned to the living room, Derek was explaining to Amanda how he planned to transition Melissa's care to him over the summer, how she'd be spending more time at his place, how he'd be taking over her college planning, how it was time for her to have a proper father figure in her life. Derek, I said, settling back onto the couch and placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. Before you make any more plans for Melissa's future, there's something you should know. Derek glanced at the envelope with mild curiosity, like it was a piece of junk mail that had accidentally been placed in his vicinity. What's that? It's information about your background, I said, my voice carefully neutral. The kind of information colleges look at when they're considering applicants. For the first time since he'd walked into our house, Derek looked uncertain. I don't know what you're talking about. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document, a criminal background check with Derek's name and photo clearly visible at the top. I'm talking about your arrest record, Derek, the charges that were filed against you in Nevada 3 years ago. Derek's face went white, then red, then white again. Amanda was staring at both of us like we'd started speaking a foreign language. That was dismissed, Derek stammered. The charges were dropped. The charges were reduced, I corrected, pulling out the next document. Fraud in the second degree, reduced from fraud in the first degree as part of a plea agreement. You received 2 years probation and community service. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Derek's labored breathing. Amanda was looking between us like she was watching a tennis match, trying to understand what was happening. David, she said slowly, what is this about? I kept my eyes on Derek as I answered. It's about the fact that your ex-husband was convicted of defrauding investors in a fake real estate development scheme. He took money from people who trusted him and used it to fund his lifestyle while promising them returns on properties that didn't exist. Derek's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the hunched posture of a man caught in a lie he'd been telling for years. The reason this matters, I continued, is because colleges do background checks on applicants and their families, especially when there are questions about how tuition is being paid. Any school Derek tries to get Melissa into will discover his criminal record within days of starting the application process. Amanda was staring at Derek like she'd never seen him before. Is this true? Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. It was a misunderstanding. A business deal that went wrong. These things happen in real estate. These things happen when you take $3 million from investors and spend it on cars, vacations, and gambling debts, I said, pulling out another document. Here's the restitution order. Derek still owes $2.7 million to his victims. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Derek's confident talk about paying for Melissa's Ivy League education suddenly seemed like the fantasy it had always been. A man who owed nearly $3 million in restitution wasn't in a position to be anyone's financial savior. More importantly, I continued, any school that accepts Melissa after Derek uses his connections to circumvent normal admissions procedures will be opening itself up to a federal investigation. The FBI has been very interested in college admissions fraud lately. Derek was shrinking into the chair, the confident mask completely gone now. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you're a convicted felon who's been lying to his daughter about his circumstances, I interrupted. I understand that you've been making promises you can't keep and dismissing the people who've actually been taking care of her. Amanda stood up abruptly, her face pale with shock and anger. Derek, get out of my house. Amanda, please, let me explain. Get out, she repeated, her voice shaking with fury. Get out right now, before I call the police. Derek looked between us, his desperate gaze finally settling on me. David, please, don't do this to Melissa. She doesn't need to know about the past. I'm trying to be a better father. You're trying to be a father, period, I said. For the first time in 8 years. And you started by dismissing the man who's actually been raising your daughter while you were off committing felonies. Derek stood up slowly, his expensive suit looking somehow cheaper now that we knew how he'd really been paying for it. This isn't over. Yes, it is, I said firmly, because tomorrow morning, I'm going to sit down with Melissa and show her these documents. She's going to learn the truth about her father's success and why her college applications are going through the normal channels, like everyone else's. Derek's face cycled through anger, desperation, and finally a kind of defeated recognition. He'd been caught, and we all knew it. His grand comeback as the successful father was over before it had really begun. And Derek? I added as he headed toward the door. The next time you want to lecture someone about limitations, you might want to remember that some of us have been building something real while you were busy building lies. After Derek left, Amanda and I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt different somehow, like we'd been holding our breath for months and could finally exhale. How long have you known? She asked finally. 3 weeks, I admitted. I hired a private investigator after Derek started talking about taking over Melissa's college plans. I needed to know who we were really dealing with. Amanda nodded slowly, processing everything. What happens now? Now we tell Melissa the truth, I said, and we help her understand that the steady, reliable love she's been taking for granted is worth more than expensive promises from someone who's never been there when it mattered. The next morning, when Melissa came home glowing from prom night, I was waiting with the documents spread out on the kitchen table. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. By the end of it, Melissa understood why her future would be built on scholarships and state schools, and the steady support of people who'd proven their commitment over years, not months. 3 months later, when Derek's restitution hearing made the local news, Melissa was already settled into her dorm room at the state university, funded by the academic scholarships she'd earned and the college fund I'd been building for 4 years. She called me that night, not to talk about her biological father's legal troubles, but to thank me for helping her understand the difference between real family and performance art. Dad, she said, and my heart swelled at the word I'd been waiting 4 years to hear again. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember who was really there for me. Sometimes the most important victories aren't about revenge or justice. Sometimes they're about a confused teenager finally understanding that love isn't measured in dollar signs or grand gestures, but in the quiet consistency of someone who shows up every day, year after year, whether anyone notices or not. And sometimes, just sometimes, they do notice after all.